G'day, welcome to another episode of A Pirate in Chains, the story of my great-great-great-grandfather, James Harrison, convict number 6071. Today we're at Port Arthur, and exactly 5 years after James was sent to Norfolk Island, he returned here to Port Arthur in early 1855. When they arrived, all 49 prisoners on the Lady Franklin were sent here to the separate prison to spend 3 months undergoing the new version of separate treatment, which James himself had experienced a little on Norfolk Island. So we're going to go inside the separate prison and explore what it's like, and then we're going to walk around the rest of the historic site here at Port Arthur and find out some other places where James might have been. So let's go inside and have a look. So the whole purpose of separate treatment was dehumanising people, and they encourage you not to make any noise when you're in here to replicate the experience, so might have to do subtitles to explain this. So imagine spending 3 months in this space, only allowed out for 1 hour's exercise a day, in total silence, unable to sing, whistle, make any noise whatsoever, unable to communicate with anyone. Only thing you have to read is a Bible, and the only way to signal attention is to summon the guards with this. I couldn't do it. It'd drive you mad. And it did drive people mad. But not our Jimmy, eh? I'm just heading into the punishment cell. Now, there's no record of James spending time in these punishment cells at Port Arthur, but he did spend time in one on Norfolk Island. And if you thought the normal cells were bad, how about these? Now, it's light in here at the moment, but the whole point of this is that you're kept in complete silence and complete darkness for an ill-defined period of time. Would drive people mad, and it did. So for 1 hour a day, James would be given the opportunity to exercise in this space, again by himself and in silence. the only bit of freedom they could see. Once a week, church services were held. The prisoners were herded into these individual pews. They were masked until they got in here, when they could take it off. But they couldn't see anybody else. But this place had one benefit. It was the only time during the week where they could actually make a noise, singing hymns and praying. And maybe it was the most enthusiastic congregation that had ever been seen in a church in Van Diemen's Land. Unbelievable. Never before seen a photo. That's if it actually is him. Unfortunately not, because James was not here in the 1870s. Oh well, it's good to hope. I can tell you now that they've got the history wrong. James was indeed 14 when he was transported in 1842 and sent to Point Pure and sentenced to death for robbery, commuted to life at Norfolk Island. Accumulated extra sentences totalling 38 months hard labour in chains, transferred to Port Arthur in 1850, sent to the separate prison as a hardened man, freed in 1860, but in 1866 he returned to serve 10 years for manslaughter, finally freed in 1873. So those last bits are absolutely incorrect, and it looks like they're confusing two James Harrisons. The picture we saw earlier of the James Harrison still here in the 1870s wasn't Jimmy. Apart from his 3 months in the separate prison, there's no record exactly of what James did in his remaining 8 months here at Port Arthur. So we'll explore some of the parts of the site where he might have actually spent some time. Possibly the most famous building here at Port Arthur is the penitentiary. And Dad's history records that after the 3 months separate treatment that James was transferred to the penitentiary. That was 1855. So that may not have actually occurred because this penitentiary was originally built as a flour mill, and only in 1854 did they begin to convert it, the top floor at least, into a barracks for prisoners. And the work wasn't completed until 1857. So James may not have actually spent time in this building. Well, I thought I had started to acclimatise to the Tassie weather, but no, it's only 16 degrees today and I had to wimp out and go back to the car and get the jacket. God, I'm soft. So while the conversion of the flour mill into the penitentiary wasn't completed until 1857, after James had got back here to Port Arthur. The previous prisoners' barracks were here on the hill behind us, but constructed of wood, they no longer exist. But this is where James would have lodged after he had served that amount of time in the separate prison. From the day it opened till the day it closed, the felling and milling of timber was the #1 industrial activity undertaken at Port Arthur. So it is more than likely that in that time after he was released from separate treatment, in the remaining 8 months of his time at Port Arthur, that James was also involved in timber work to some extent. But again, as the only records are kept are those of offences and punishments, we can't really be sure exactly. It's also likely that James spent time here on the government farm, where the most important crop was vegetables, to make sure that people didn't come down with scurvy, and huge numbers of cabbages and potatoes were grown on this crop right here. So while compared to Kingston or Norfolk Island, Port Arthur is very much a tourist destination, and of course therefore is absolutely full of tourists, making it somewhat difficult to get some reasonable shots without intruding on other people's privacy. But one thing you can say about Port Arthur is that the interpretation here is absolutely second to none. It's many years since I've actually visited Port Arthur, and I'm just blown away by how brilliant it is in terms of explaining and giving you an experience about what you actually see. First time a pirate's been in chains since many a year. I tell you, you wouldn't want to wear these every day. Unbelievable. Well, didn't get any further than the gallery here at the Port Arthur Historic Site. We find James already. It's a pretty special moment here to find him recorded on the wall, illustrating all of the sites in the World Heritage Australian Convict Site. It's yeah, pretty special. Good on you, Jimmy, you little pirate. Unbelievable. Not only do we have James Harrison, but we have Bartholomew Reardon, the person who he later robbed. This is really bending my mind. Apparently this is a search where you can search for convicts. So it's just a coincidence that Bartholomew Reardon appeared, but it's one hell of a coincidence. I wouldn't say that was a subject to the paranormal, but just one hell of a coincidence, isn't it? Oh, man. Many years ago, I was walking along here on a ghost tour with my then girlfriend, Sonia. You know, the way gorgeous but way psycho. Anyway, we were walking up here. I suddenly heard a yelp. And when we got back to the hotel room, she said, she hadn't grabbed me on the elbow like that. She pulled up the sleeve of her jumper and she said, look, you've actually left bruises on my arm. And I said, hey, I didn't grab you. Someone else must have. Anyway, some years after that, I was on a ghost tour with a school group that I was leading here. And as we came up here, the guy leading the tour said, now make sure you stick closely together because there have been reports of people being grabbed on the elbow and no one has actually been able to identify who did it. Now, at the time, I thought that Son was just crazy, that she'd imagined it or someone had grabbed her on the elbow. But and I know that she didn't tell anyone about it, so I just put it down to that. But let's have a look at a book that I found in the gift shop here at Port Arthur. See, I wasn't lying. So while this boatyard was actually closed by the time that James returned here to Port Arthur, it does have some significance in that this artist's replica here is of the Lady Franklin, which is the ship that took James both to and from Norfolk Island. Lady Franklin was actually built right here on this slipyard here at the Port Arthur boatyard.
Adzers 12, augers 10, buckets 5.
On the 29th of April 1855, James had 8 days of his sentence remitted as a reward for assisting in fighting fires. Now, at that time, James was still serving his 3 months in the separate prison, so it was unlikely that the fire was there. So, more than likely, the fire that he helped with happened on Norfolk Island prior to his return to Van Diemen's Land, or Tasmania as it was then. You remember from the Norfolk Island episode when they added that extra 3 years upon his life sentence, you know, how they were going to keep him in prison after he was dead as a result of the piracy episode Armed with a Chisel. On the 14th of June 1855, that 3 years extra was remitted, probably as a decision made by the Commandant who resided here. And it wasn't long before James's time here at Port Arthur also came to an end. as we look behind us through the paupers complex, built for those convicts who couldn't survive in society, and in the background, the asylum, built for those convicts that the system had driven insane, we should perhaps pause and think that after all of his time, after all those floggings, after all that solitary confinement, after all that hard labour in chains, and even considering that his instructor at Point Pure said that he'd never make a living from his trade, James didn't end up as a pauper, and he didn't go mad. So we should actually marvel at his resilience. In February 1856, it was determined that James had served his time in the penal system, being Norfolk Island and returning here to Port Arthur, and he was transferred to the probation system. And so he left Port Arthur and headed towards Hobart at the prisoners' barracks. And that's where we'll end this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please click like, please subscribe, hit me up some comments in the box below, and yeah, stay tuned for the next episode of A Pirate in Chains. Thanks for watching. Well, it looks like the only crime being committed at Port Arthur these days is the price of the food at the cafe. $6 for, this is about half the size of what these sausage rolls were. Anyway, at least there's no one to punish them for it. This is the replanted Soldiers Memorial Avenue here at Port Arthur. This is to remember the residents of Carnarvon area who were killed in the Great War, World War I, between 1914 to 1918. And it's interesting that James Harrison's grandsons, Percy Herbert, my great-grandfather, and Claude, his brother, were both commemorated on the Soldiers Memorial Avenue in Hobart.